You think it's safe to get up for one thing just for a minute? Don't sleep yet. I collect stories like small, dangerous objects, hard to touch, harder to forget. Tonight I have 8 of them. 8 people who told me, in their own voices, what happened when the clock said it was too late and they answered something inside them that said, just go out for a minute. Each one sounds ordinary at first. A late shift, a cigarette, a short drive. Then the night does what the night does best, folds itself into something unrecognizable. Listen close. Keep the lights on if you have to. If you like true late-night dread, tap like and stick around. First, a quick map of where we're headed. A man building his dream factory who goes out at 2 in the morning. A bike ride that turns into an impossible company on a dirt road. A cigarette run where the neighborhood dog stops speaking. A New Year's exit that ends with a car and a view in the rear view that shouldn't have been there. An elevator that stops and becomes a roof someone walks across. An ATM withdrawal no bank can trace. A pale white cloud in a parking garage. And a corner pharmacy, where the clerk looked exactly wrong. 8 small decisions, 8 lasting rules. Don't go out after a certain hour. Story 1. Pablo, the factory. My name is Pablo. I was 29 and I was starving and stubborn and convinced I knew everything about ventilators and textile looms. I'd been living in a little 2-bedroom above a storefront and using my life savings to finish what I believed would be a small factory, the kind of place that smells like oil and new cotton and fluorescent light. My partner Danny was the one who slept for the most part. I worked at night because the suppliers called from different time zones, because the machines were quieter, and because I was trying to catch up to a schedule I'd promised myself. It was 2 in the morning when Danny called. The phone buzzed against the nightstand in that insistent way that says something is wrong without telling you what. He was breathing fast on the call. There was a stitch of panic in the background like someone running up concrete stairs. "The new spinner," he said. "It's not right. I went down to check and... Pablo, just come down." He didn't sound hysterical, just keyed up enough for me to say yes without thinking. I grabbed my jacket, the keys, the little flashlight that lived in the glove compartment, and I went. The drive to the industrial strip takes 15 minutes if the lights cooperate. At that hour, the city looks flat. Warehouses closed, neon asleep, the diner with its last cup of coffee steaming in an employee's hand. The factory sits beyond the last light, a rectangular building whose windows are mostly dark except for one strip of yellow where the office is. The yard smelled of oil and night rain. The spinner room was dim. There was a machine with a chewed belt and a loose wire that made a small, angry hum. Danny was pacing, his breath quick like he hadn't allowed himself to sit down. He had the headlamp on, the light a harsh circle on the concrete. "It turns itself off," he said. "It won't run more than a minute, then it dies." I checked the panel. No fault codes. He spoke like a man listing out facts in a house on fire, trying reason as if it were a blanket. We climbed into the cab of the old delivery van to move the spinner. The van's engine started with that particular cough that meant it had been in the cold. We pushed the spinner into the bay, and when I shifted into reverse to pull out, the dashboard blinked, and then went dead. Headlight glow went from steady to something thin and paper soft. The radio went silent. The dome light. Nothing. The van was as quiet as a sealed room. I thought battery. I thought a wire. I went about the motions because those are the things you do when you must appear in control. Check fuses, tap the ignition, try the key again. Each time the starter would clunk, and then the whole van would sit like a heart that forgot how to beat. That's when I noticed, perched at the edge of the van's headlight cone, a figure. It stood just beyond the range, taller than a man, thinner but not hunched. It had the height of a person, seemed to be wearing something dark that soaked the light. There was no face to it the way you expect a face. No eyes, no nose, nothing to fix your gaze to. Just the suggestion of shoulders and a head. When it stepped, the gravel didn't crunch underfoot. It moved like a shadow obeying a different gravity. Not touching but insinuating itself into the space the way cold does. For a second I thought it was a trick of the mind. 2 in the morning, stress, the van's failing engine. I laughed a short, sharp laugh I would later call a reflex rather than humor. "Danny?" I said. He was crouched under the spinner, elbows greasy. He didn't look up. The figure walked toward the van in a way that didn't match human cadence. I could point to it with the light from the office, and it did not change. The hair on my arms rose. I remember thinking, weirdly, of an old lamppost photograph where the exposure had smeared a person into a dark line. I thought then that maybe I was seeing the outline of someone who belonged to a picture. Panic hit like a drum roll. I jammed the key. For a breathless moment, nothing. Then the engine turned over, an obedient little cough, and the van came to life like a dog you have finally convinced to move. I didn't wait. I floored it out of the bay and into the street. On the way out, the office light cut to black like someone had pressed a switch. When I glanced in the rear view, the place where the figure had been was simply dark air. No footprints in the gravel. No bottle on the shoulder to have cast a human silhouette. It's been months since that night. I don't go into the factory after 11. I lock the front door at 10, even if someone's waiting. I tell myself safe reasons, security, the machinery still being in motion. But there's a rule in me now that's sharper than the fear of theft or a bad engine. Something about the imposition of a human shape into the night changed the math. If staying might mean avoiding another moment where something with no face steps out of the dark, then my stubbornness for the plan is no longer as stubborn. If that was me, I'd never go back out either. Next, a ride that shouldn't have been taken. Story 2. Miguel, the dirt road. I'll call myself Miguel. I'm not proud of how easy I was to persuade. There was a girl, and there was beer, and there was that late reckless ember inside you when you're 20 and think the night has rules that only apply to other people. She asked me to come to a party in the valley outside town, the kind of place where the streetlights stop and your headlight throws a private world for 10 yards in front of you. My motorcycle was old, a little stubborn sound like someone clearing their throat. The road out of town narrows into a ribbon of crushed stone and dust. At that hour, the valley smells like wild sage and the exhaust of cars that pass every few minutes. I rode with the low beam on, ears full of the chain and the wind. The party was 3 miles down the dirt road, a ring of vehicles and a radio too loud, the kind of cheap light that makes everyone look younger and more dangerous. I remember the air changing. Dogs shut up either aggressively or with sudden alert silence. I can't explain the difference without how it stays in your chest. The hair at the back of my neck prickled. Then, as I cut through a shallow curve, something fell into place beside me. It was an old man. No motorcycle. And he was moving exactly as fast as I was without touch of wheel or ground. He had colorless eyes, black, glossy, like marbles that had been turned to ink. They weren't pupils. They were interruptions in the skin, like missing buttons. He wore a jacket that hung like a coat on a clothesline. The thing that stood out was his posture. He sat as though he rode an invisible bike, knees bent, hands in a grip, leaning into the road with me. I checked my mirror. There was nothing behind me. The air behind was just night. In the periphery, I felt the ghost of presence. Another rider, right there, matching my speed, like someone had decided to accompany me for the rest of the way. My first instinct was to be polite. Stupid reflex. I glanced left, then right, spit a laugh out loud because what else does one do? Nothing changes one's pace like embarrassment. The old man's eyes looked at me as though that laugh was the continuation of a conversation he already knew. He didn't speak. He didn't ride forward or fall back. He remained an impossible passenger. "There's someone beside me," I said later to the people at the party, and they all looked at me like you look at someone describing a dream that has overstayed its welcome. One of them reached back toward the road with a flashlight to check. They saw nothing. One of my friends swore he'd seen the road where I came from. A flash of light, and then nothing. It was like the night ate anything that might explain it. After that night, I sleep with the helmet in the closet, like something that keeps secrets for me. I stopped going out on the bike after midnight. When I lie down, I feel the impression of 2 hands on the grips, like an imprint on my shoulder, even when I know nobody is there. It's a small rule. I go out before dark or I don't go at all. The road taught me that companionship can be the most dangerous thing if it isn't human. If you'd told me I'd start obeying a time on a clock because of a stranger's empty eyes, I would have laughed you off the porch. But we begin to make rules to keep our lives usable. You'll hear echoes of that same rule again. Next, a cigarette run that should have been a shorter distance. Story 3. Maritza, the cigarette run. My name is Maritza. I worked nights on the floor of a hospital. Clerical work, all files and forms, and the smell of disinfectant that never quite leaves your hair. We finished late. Sometimes I would stay awake afterward and smoke on the stoop because the night makes things easier to tolerate. That night, I stepped out for a cigarette, the kind of errand you tell yourself is a 2-minute thing. The street outside my building was one of those cul-de-sacs that holds more silence than the rest of the city. Usually there are dogs, somebody's small yelping chihuahua, a couple of strays. That night the dogs were not barking. It's a small detail until you remember it. The silence had a thickness to it, like the room had been wrapped in cloth. I walked to the corner convenience store. It's the place everyone knows, open late for people who ran out of milk or cigarettes or patience. I pushed the door, and the bell didn't ring. The fluorescent inside was one steady hum. The cashier, an older man who usually frowned like he wasn't being paid enough to cheer, watched me without moving. I paid and left, cigarette paper in my fingers, and when I lit the match everything felt louder. Across from the store there's a house with a small iron fence. Sitting on the top step was a collie, big dog, always alert, and when I walked past it, the dog turned its head in that way dogs turn their heads when you're interesting. But it didn't move its paws on the step. Behind the dog, as if it had flowed out of the paint, a shadow crossed through a solid wall and kept going as though the wall were a curtain. It didn't seek an open door. It simply passed through, and the dog's movement didn't change. The dog froze as if someone had told it to stay. I ran. It's embarrassing to say I ran for a cigarette, but I sprinted back, pulled the door open, slammed it. The man behind the counter looked up like a doctor who'd just been paid to do his job. He asked if I was okay, and I lied, and said I was fine. I slept poorly afterwards. I woke up the next morning, and the urge for nicotine had snagged like a string and then gone. I never felt that craving again the way I did before. The habit fell off like loose paint. I don't go out for cigarettes at night anymore. I stay in and let the pack in the drawer sit. Friends joke and call me dramatic. I smile and count the small savings of not getting out of the house. The dog's unblinking behavior sits in my mind like a puzzle I don't want to solve. If you think you can sneak out for something small and nothing will change, think of the dog on the step, and the figure that moved through concrete like it was a doorway. Up next, Ricardo, and a rear view that looked back at more than his own mistakes. Story 4. Ricardo, the parking garage. My name is Ricardo. That night was New Year's. You remember them, the ones where the dawn gets up slow and you give promises you mean to keep. I had been at one celebration with an ex-colleague, a quick exchange of fireworks and toasts, and then my head started pulling toward another house where the music had stayed on. Halfway through the second party, I decided to leave, just for a breath of air, a drive, a change of scene. The parking garage was concrete and echoing, the kind of place that eats sound and leaves it as an unhappy, sick feeling in your chest. I sat in my car, speaking on the phone to someone else who was coming to meet me. I remember chewing at the inside of my cheek the way some people think. I reached for the rearview mirror to angle it while talking, the small human habit of checking yourself while you talk to a friend. That's when I saw her. A pale woman, shriveled like paper, sat in the back seat, all of her skin the color of dishwater left too long. She didn't move. She looked toward the front of the car with a kind of small smile that made it worse because it looked like a terrible memory pretending to be pleasant. She had the sense of having been alive for a long time, and of being learned in the ways of staying put. My first thought was that someone was playing a cruel trick. I froze with the phone in my ear. I don't remember the words anymore. My foot pressed the gas without me deciding to. I remember the sheer animal panic that made the pedal, and my will the same thing. The garage drops off at the third level. There's a ledge and then a long fall to the street. I didn't see that. I saw only the pale face. I saw only the smile that did not belong to a living mouth. The car rushed. The concrete blurred. There was this loud liquid sound as the front of the vehicle passed air that was not waiting for it. I was airborne. And then metal and lights and the sudden cold jerk of the world stopping. I woke up outside the car. People were around me. Voices, hands, the smell of motor oil and antiseptic. My leg was broken in the way that insists on being noticed. The paramedics asked the usual questions. I told them, in between pain and the odd pop of knuckles, what I had seen. They looked at me like a man at a hospital bed might be looked at. Distant compassion. The kind of compassion that marks an event as something they can package and send down a chart. No one else saw her. The party people swore they heard a crash, but not the story of a passenger in my back seat. Cameras in the garage, motion sensors, security feed, recorded the car leaving and leaving the lane. But there was no image of anyone here beside me on the stairs. I made the mistake of asking for proof. The feed had a blank second in it where the car should have been clear. The footage had a stutter. The timestamp skipped half a second. It felt like a misprint in a book, an accidental omission where someone had removed a line. I survived. I was injured. The scars on my leg are like a cheap map of what not to do. I don't go out to parties anymore unless I have to. I make plans in the early evening and promise myself I'll stick around. There's a rule now. You don't leave a gathering to go look for another one. There's a cost to switching the night's orbit. Strange how the pale face sits in the memory worse than the fall. You expect the physics to be the thing you recall. Speed, impact, pain. What stays is the wrong smile. People say maybe it was fatigue, adrenaline, a trick of light. I can live with those. Except for the way the smile looked practiced, like someone who had been waiting to be seen. If you ever find yourself checking the back seat in a garage, do it slowly. That compulsion can save you, or it can make your foot press the gas and undo your balance. Next up, a woman who stepped into an elevator she thought would take her to a laugh, and instead listened to the roof walk. Story 5. The elevator. I was on my way to meet friends. The building was a neighbor's old place turned into a loft for weekend parties, the kind where the common elevator always smells like the dry cleaner. I pressed the button and the elevator doors folded open like a mouth waiting. Inside, it was warm and smelled faintly of perfume. There were 2 guys sharing a pack of cigarettes, a woman applying gloss in a polished compact. I pressed the floor button, the tinny old display counting the numbers like a pulse detector. 5, 4, 3, and then we stopped. The floor number blinked and hung like a broken clock. The lights plunged into that matte kind of glow that leaves shadows as sharp cuts. At first the break felt small. The 2 guys laughed, a tight, brittle sound, and someone suggested we push the door open and ride the stairs. The doors did not respond. The metal of the elevator creaked, soft and slow as if settling, and then we heard it. A step on the roof above us. Not a thump, but a measured press of someone walking exactly, unequivocally, 3 paces in sequence, heel, toe, heel. There is an odd thing about sound in the confined place of an elevator. It magnifies and distorts. It becomes a lie and a truth at once. The footsteps above were accurate and human-sounding. They were also impossible. Elevators are not supposed to have people walking on their roofs while you ride. We called out. There was nothing. We pounded on the door. The steps moved as if they were pacing us, matching a celebration cadence. Heel, toe, heel. They stopped directly above the elevator, and then resumed in a slow circle like someone checking their pockets for a train ticket. The woman with the gloss started to laugh, an attempt at thin control. One by one, the laughter frayed into tight breaths. Our phones showed no signal, little gray bars that looked like a verdict. We pushed the alarm. It buzzed, the alarm speaking in a tired voice that was supposed to comfort. The light above the panel flickered and the temperature dropped. My breath fogged. I walked to the corner of the car by the door where the sound seemed to be most solid. I put my palm flat against the metal and felt nothing but the cool press. The steps above me went from paced walking to a heavy, slow drag like someone dragging a canvas sack across a roof. The motion made my mouth dry. There's someone up there, I said out loud because refusal to name it felt like a refusal to survive. The others were pressed against the opposite wall like people in a painting who didn't want to be the subject. We tried the emergency hatch. It's a small square designed to let maintenance in, not for people to use at parties. The hatch is never the right size. The lock is always stiff. I wedged my fingers in. The metal wasn't hot or icy. It was ordinary, like a radiator in January. Above us, the drag stopped. For a second, there was the hush that comes before a word is said, and you realize you should have kept quiet. Then, from directly above the hatch, came the sound of a foot rotating. It was a little noise like a pebble rolling on a tile. Then faster, rapping, as if someone were counting on the roof with their knuckles. 3 sharp knocks, spaced the way you count out a name. We held our breath. The knocks came again. They seemed to prefer the cadence of a slow Morse code for a single letter. A voice crackled faintly over the alarm speaker. Not a voice. A breath. Something inhaled in the exact rhythm of a person preparing to speak. The light in the corner of the ceiling dipped, and we saw the shadow where the access panel above the hatch rested like a trap door. My fingers slipped on the metal rim. I let go and sat down hard. The people with me tried to steady spirits. Someone recited the number for building maintenance. The operator voice on the line came back tinny and mechanical, and then the connection frayed into static, the sound that sounds like an old radio trying to find a station. Then the pounding began. It was fists. Not the polite, curious tapping, but the kind of pounding you make when you want to be heard because you are furious at not being considered. The metal of the roof carried it down into our ribs and into the floor like a heartbeat that wasn't ours. We stepped back as a group. One of the guys tried the door again. It didn't budge. I'm telling you this because there's a precise angle to the way fear settles in a person's face when they realize their options have been narrowed. You imagine the doors open. You imagine emergency lights. You imagine people running to pull you out. Instead, the noise above changed into a slow, careful dragging, and then stopped. The lights warmed like someone had turned up a dimmer. We could all feel the muscles unclench in our jaws at once. Someone whispered that maybe the person above had walked away, and the instability in the sound said nothing else. 2 fingers of light appeared at the top seam of the elevator doors, like a slit where daylight leaks into a cave, and then the elevator jolted as though it had been given permission by an unseen conductor. The floor leapt a fraction, and then held. Above us, the ceiling did not seem as intact as it had been. There was a tiny smear of something dark across the access panel. I don't know what it was. I only know that it moved the way something that had been pressed might move. "Hold on," someone said, the voice small as a coin. We waited. The light came on brighter. The panel above us clicked, and then made a slow, wet sound like a lid being set down. The radio in one of the guy's hands buzzed hard, and then went dead. The motion above resumed, but not a walking motion. This time it sounded like shoeless feet, the slap of skin on metal, and it circled once, slow and deliberate, as if it wanted to make sure we were all still there. We were all still there. The elevator lurched, as if someone had pushed from the outside. The cables creaked. A minute later, or an hour, time lied in that box. The lights surged back to normal and the numbers began to climb again. The doors refused to open. The display blinked a glitchy pattern I didn't recognize. I remember the hair on my forearms feeling like someone's hand had run across them. At that point I felt something else. A pressure not unlike a presence at the back of your neck, like a person deciding whether to put their hand on your shoulder. The sound under our feet changed to a subtle, almost inaudible humming like a distant transformer. The skin on my face felt tight and baby-fine. Someone started to cry. They tried to keep it quiet, as if crying were a thing that could be judged. The phone bars came back for half a second. Static. Then responsible and slow, a sound like someone whispering words into a mouthpiece. Words you couldn't hear clearly, and the elevator shuddered. We all grabbed at the walls. The air smelled like pennies in an old closet. The tension was a live wire through the car. A concerned voice over the intercom said maintenance was on their way, and asked if we were okay. My mouth found no words. The man next to me began to pray under his breath. The woman with the gloss started to laugh again, an attempt at sparing herself panic. The knocks above started once more, but this time they were directed at the panel itself in an irregular pattern, as if someone were deciphering the hinges. And then the light above the hatch dimmed. A small, precise dimming that made the metal look like it had been eaten away from the edges. We could hear the nails on the roof as they scraped slowly, almost deliberately, as though someone were being careful not to make a noise that would wake another occupant. The door to the elevator stayed shut. The voice insisted help was coming. The people inside tried to keep calm. The knocks became a rhythm, an insistence that matched the beat of my heart. Knock, pause, knock, pause, knock. My breath sharpened, and then I felt a vibration under my shoes, like a humming that came from both the elevator and the building at once. We were almost at the point of believing someone would really come for us when the sound from above stopped in a way that seemed to collect itself, like a suspended note. The air grew so still the breath in the car sounded like the whole world inhaling. Then the hatch above us shifted. There was a small sound like a coin rolling. The tiny square of panel gave an inch of give, and then there was a faint, oily smear across the metal around the seam, as though someone had been touching it with a cloth soaked in something dark. We could all see it. It was close enough to reach, it was close enough to touch. That's where the story stops for a moment. The light from the car threw up the smear, and then the door between us and the rest of the building remained stubbornly sealed. The person on my left whispered, "If they open it, don't look up." My voice, lips dry and absurdly small, replied, "Why would I? How could that help?" Someone laughed, but it tasted like a scream. We kept still. We held each other's eyes. Outside the box, somewhere up in the building, the stairwell lights flashed for a second like someone was running. The elevator hung, a suspended heart, as we waited for a sound that would mean rescue, or something else. Don't sleep yet. The night is full of small decisions. You thought getting into an elevator was nothing. You thought stepping out to the stoop for a cigarette was nothing. But the night rearranges nothing into everything if you let it. Stay where warmth and light and the familiar items are. For now, stay awake. Inside the hatch above our heads there was a knock that sounded like a question. The people inside held their breath. The night had not finished speaking. Inside the hatch above our heads, there was a knock that sounded like a question. It came once more, smaller this time, as if whatever was asking had decided to be polite. The people in the car held their breath like a held note. Somewhere in the building a stairwell light flicked on and ran up a handful of steps. Someone moving, maybe a neighbor checking the panel. For an instant I imagined the door between the elevator and the world would open, and a hand would reach in, and everything would be ordinary again. Instead, the hatch slid a fraction, and a thin, pale edge of something slipped through. It wasn't light. It was an absence with texture, like the underside of a cloud or a piece of cloth someone had dragged across a polished table. At the seam there was a smear that glistened under the elevator light. Not blood, not anything I could name, just something that indicated contact, as if something had been pressing its palm against a lid and left the shape. The person next to me whispered, "Don't look up," mostly because we were all already looking up. The woman with the gloss started to pray silently, the sound a soft consonant under her breath. The guys tried to joke, but the jokes were small and brittle like bones. We waited. The smell changed. Something metallic ran through the air like coins chafing together. Then, as if someone had decided we were going to be allowed one small mercy, the elevator lurched. A mechanical protest that threw us against the opposite wall, and the lights came back steady. The numbers on the display crawled again. The doors sighed open to the hallway, and a maintenance guy stood there with a flashbulb grin and a clipboard, like anyone else in the world who has to patch things up and return to coffee. He called down with the voice of someone who has only the daytime catastrophes of flickering fluorescence in his head. "Stuck? Sorry about that. Power dipped. All good now." He held out his hand to help us. We spilled out onto the carpeted hallway, blinking and cold and all of us suddenly awkward about holding our phones like lifelines. We filed past the maintenance man and into the stairwell where the lights burned stupidly bright. He checked a panel and shrugged. Never found any signs of anyone up there, he said. No footprints, nothing. We'll take a look. I remember thinking how clinical the sentence sounded compared to the raw thing in my chest that felt like it was still pacing. Later, the building superintendent sent an email to the tenants. A routine apology about power fluctuations and a promise to inspect the elevator. The building log showed nothing unusual. The maintenance official who came by the next day was polite and a little vague about the exact cause. He blamed a transformer, a squirrel, something mundane to close the story with a sensible end. I went to the party that night with other people and tried to laugh the memory into a funny story about an elevator being quirky. But when I closed my eyes later, the cadence of the knocks returned. Knock, pause, the way a metronome keeps time even when you think you've turned it off. I stopped going out to late-night parties the way I used to. I tell myself it's sensible. Elevators are weird machines. But if I'm honest, there's a part of me that imagines a hand on the edge of the hatch, feeling the metal, deciding whether to open. If you think elevators are safe because they are ordinary, remember the sound above that sounded like a person counting the minutes until you could be taken. Next, Cristobal at an ATM. What he took from the machine left no record. Story 6. Cristobal, the ATM. My name is Cristobal. I worked late at a law office for a while, and for an entire season of my life, my pockets were always two things: a wallet and a restless need to be somewhere else. One night I walked out later than I meant to. The streets had emptied like a stage after the actors have left. I needed cash, an old habit, and the corner ATM was the one place I trusted. It sits under a buzzing sodium lamp on a corner that feels smaller in the dark, the way some objects shrink when they have fewer people to define them. The ATM makes small sounds, a hushed clack when the card slides in, a mechanical sigh when it counts out bills, the low fan of its inner workings. That night, the machine hummed like a sleeping animal. I approached with my hand in my pocket, pulling out the card with a thumb that was busy thinking about home. A woman stood at the far end of the sidewalk by the street lamp. She was dressed in black from head to toe, and she looked as if she had been carved from the shadow itself. Because I'm a person who waits for the world to be kind, I noticed first that she was smiling. Not a smile that says hello, something crooked and patient, like someone who has been keeping a secret for a long time. Her head tilted the smallest fraction to the side, and the smile didn't move like a mouth so much as an intention painted onto her face. The ATM screen lit up under my fingers. I entered numbers. The tap of my thumb against the keypad sounded loud in the empty street. The woman in black didn't move closer. She remained there, a statue watching a small domestic ritual that had been interrupted. When the machine offered me the amount I selected, I felt a twitch of relief. I pushed the button to accept. The slot clacked and the bills came, quiet and precise. I took the money and left. My feet found speed like a habit. It's the way your body tries to outrun an unease that hasn't yet put a name on itself. I turned at the corner to look back, not a bravado glance, a habit of someone who doesn't like to be watched. And the woman was gone. No flicker of movement, no shadow where she had stood. It was as if the lamp had been polished and the world reordered. The next day at work, I checked my bank app. The withdrawal showed as pending in the ledger in the way a footprint shows before a storm. But when I called the bank, they told me there was no record of the cash ever leaving the ATM. The machine's internal logs, at least the ones the branch could access, showed only the card being inserted, nothing else. The teller was respectful, but distant. "Electronic records can be finicky," she said. "We'll run a diagnostic." The diagnostic, of course, showed nothing anomalous. It was as if one small transaction had been erased from the ledger of the world. That was the first time I thought maybe I shouldn't walk to the ATM at midnight. For months I avoided it. I went to the bank during business hours like everyone else. When I told friends the story, they smirked and offered technical reasons. A dispensing error, a faulty sensor. Maybe. And then they would look at me with the friendliness of people who don't want to press the subject. The feeling that someone had been watching me, smiling, crooked, is what lasted. I stopped carrying cash at night. I avoid that street lamp. Sometimes when I'm alone and the bills are gone from my wallet and the bank app shows balances that make sense, the memory of a woman in black watching me is sharp enough to make me check over my shoulder. It's less a rule and more a muscle memory now. Don't take the route where you were observed. Don't be where the night chooses to keep its secrets. If you think nothing will look back at you while you're doing something ordinary, remember how simply taking out money felt like exposing a pocket of yourself to be inspected. Up next, a man who went into a parking lot for his laptop and came back thinking the air was full of static and something that wasn't air at all. Story 7. Aaron. The Parking Lot Cloud. My name is Aaron. I was the kind of person whose life lived under fluorescent lights, IT support, late-night emails, the sort of man whose work moved best when the city around him had slowed down. One night I finished a ticket at the office and remembered I had left my laptop in the car. It was a small, practical annoyance. The office parking garage was only a few floors down, an ordinary concrete nest where people left keys and secrets. The stairwell smelled like dust and oil. My shoes hit the concrete steps with a steady rhythm. The parking level where I kept my car has a low ceiling and those flat, cheap bulbs that give everything a greenish tinge. I unlocked the car and reached in for the laptop bag. For a second, the world carried on like it always had. Keys clinking, the neighbor's radio from a door 2 down, the distant hum of highway travel. Then a static sound filled the space. It was like the moment before a speaker connects. Just a charge in the air. It made the hairs stand up on my forearm and a tang in the back of my teeth. The bulbs above the bays stuttered and for a breath the world dimmed. When the light returned, there was a small white thing hovering at about chest height near my car. It looked like a cloud. No, not a cloud the sky makes, but a pocket of mist condensed into a shape someone had tried to blow into being. It was about the size of a basketball, and when it hung there, it made the air taste faintly of ozone. The thing was white and clean-looking, almost domestic, like a baguette of fog someone had left on a shelf. It drifted slowly, curious but not hurried, and its edges were too sharp for fog. I blinked hard. The static swelled and then resolved into a new sound, a small insect buzz magnified by the garage's concrete. The little cloud moved like it belonged, passing under a beam as if it knew the route it wanted to take. My brain, which had been trained on software updates and email servers, started offering options. A chemical leak, a steam plume, some maintenance crew with a fogger. Nothing fit the precise way it avoided the paint on the pillars, the way it threaded through a support column, as if the column were not there. The cloud rose and passed through the ceiling above Bay C, a patch of ceiling that is not open, filled in with dense concrete. It didn't squeeze or smudge the concrete. It simply continued, as if the ceiling had become a curtain. When it went through the surface, there was the quietest sound, like a whisper being pushed through a sock. The static filled my ears, and my phone went from a full bar to no signal in the span of a blink. I felt something brush the back of my neck then, a presence as if something had circled me twice and decided I was not interesting enough to keep. My chest tightened. I picked up the laptop bag in an automatic motion and walked to the stairwell like someone who can't allow their body to be uncertain for long. My keys shook in my hand. The doors to the stairwell slammed closed behind me with a sound like a judge's gavel. Outside, my car alarm chirped faintly as if it missed me. Back at my desk, the world was calm, and my coworkers looked at me like I was telling them I had misplaced a pen. I tried to describe the cloud, but the words collapsed. They either sounded like a joke or a report you add to the Strange Things folder. No one had seen anything. Cameras in the garage didn't show the white form passing through the ceiling. The footage slowed and skipped at the exact second I had been watching. It was the usual half-second gap you get with cheap surveillance, except that it was the day, and the camera both agreeing to conceal one sliver of time. I gave up going down to the lot after midnight. My friend joked that maybe I'd discovered a new kind of spill-proof fog. I stopped laughing. For a while, every hum and crackle of the office felt like a memory of that static. I no longer go to the garage alone at night. If I must, I ask someone to come with me, or I wait until morning. The cloud was small and not violent, but it taught me that the night enjoys testing the edges of ordinary life. You would think a floating white thing would be the end of the story, easy to rationalize away. But the way it slipped through concrete and the way the cameras chose to skip makes me keep a little lamp by the door. Little lights, rational decisions, habits. They become your only defense against small, clever things the dark might keep. Next, the person with the toothache who went to the corner pharmacy and found a clerk who looked wrong in a way that refused to be explained. Story 8. Len the Pharmacy. They called me Len then because my given name is longer, and late-night breath isn't patient with syllables. I had been awake for a long time with a tooth that felt like a fist. Around 2 in the morning there are 2 choices when your tooth decides to protest. You ride it out or you seek help. I decided to seek help. The corner pharmacy on Willow had always been a small miracle. It opened late sometimes, an old man and a lamp and a stack of cough syrup. That night there was a light on like a beacon. The bell over the door didn't jingle when I came in. The clerk, who was the kind of man whose hands always smelled faintly of soap and cigarettes, stood behind the counter like a man trying to look awake. He turned slowly when he heard me. There was the briefest lag, that 100th of a second where someone lags on the fact of recognition, as if they are trying to recall where to put a face. He smiled, a polite tilt of mouth, and then the smile fell into something else. When he turned his face, the middle of his forehead had a small hole. It wasn't a hole the way a split takes wood. It was an absence in the face the way a bite is taken from a cookie and you see the inside. There was no blood. There was an impossible cleanliness to it the way a hole cut clean with a tool looks. You saw the ridge where the skin should have continued, the emptiness framed like a window. The effect was not gore, but wrongness, a place where continuity of flesh had been erased. I stared because I couldn't not. The toothache made the lines on my face thinner, like a map under strain. The clerk's eyes did not flicker with the human embarrassment of someone revealing a secret injury. He continued in his slow, measured way, as if he had a long list of customers and nothing in the world could disturb the order of it. He said, "Can I help you?" And the mouth that said it was right on schedule. My legs meant to run then, and my feet betrayed me by remaining. I asked for painkillers in a voice that sounded like someone reading from a script. He reached and handed me a small bottle, as if we were in a different room where everything was on time. The fluorescent light hummed. The bell over the door was quiet when I left. Outside, the street felt too small. I staggered home in a daze, clutching the bottle and something else that had begun to swell in my chest. Horror that wanted proof. I woke a neighbor, and we walked back together. The kind of thing you do because fear wants witnesses. When we pushed the pharmacy door, it was dark. The light that had been burning like a watchman's eye was off. A note was taped to the window, closed for inventory. The sign looked ordinary and pointless. We pounded on the glass and called to the clerk, and the neighbor pressed his ear to the door and said, "No answer." There was no movement inside. The back doors were locked. In the morning, I learned the corner pharmacy had been the scene of a robbery months before, an incident that had left a clerk hurt, in a way the police had catalogued as assault with a blunt instrument. They had filed a report, and the pharmacy had reopened with a new man working nights. But there was a blank where the history of that morning should have been. I never went out at night again to buy things I could wait for. I glued a little light to the inside of my kitchen, and hung a small bell on the inside of the door so I would not have to go looking. The hole in the clerk's forehead did not reappear in my memory as a wound. It stuck as an absence, an omission of something like a name. Later, when I told the story at the diner with coffee warming both hands, people suggested stress, exhaustion, the way pain rewrites reality. Maybe. I don't know. I do know the clerk's fingers were ordinary and the hole was not. Aftermaths and rules 8 small choices, 8 immediate consequences that were not in the day after glow, easily explained away. Pablo locked his factory earlier. Miguel stopped riding after dark. Maritza quit sneaking cigarettes. Ricardo learned to stay put and keep the back seat in his line of sight. The woman in the elevator never went out to parties late. Cristobal stopped using the late-night ATM. Aaron no longer goes to the parking garage alone. Len stopped running errands in the night. Each person I spoke to made a new rule the way someone stitches a seam, careful, practical, and meant to hold a frayed life together. You'll notice the little threads that connect these stories. Silence where noise should be. Dogs quiet. Radio static. The hum of an ATM where a ledger should be. The absence of cameras and the half-second gap in footage where the night bodies its truth into a missing frame. Small human gestures. Checking a rear-view mirror, lighting a cigarette, reaching for a laptop, become the hinge where something else decides whether to enter. The most common response people give when I tell them is some version of, was it the fatigue, the adrenaline, drugs, stress? Those are reasonable things. They are also not the whole story. These explanations can cover a lot, but they don't account for an entire street going quiet the instant before a silhouette steps out, or for a cloud of white drifting through concrete, or for a camera that chooses to skip a breath. What we can say, firmly and with no supernatural certainty, is that something about the night's physics changed in small, repeatable ways across these accounts. Maybe it was hallucinatory, the mind's own theater in reaction to sleep deprivation and stress and imagination. Maybe the recordings lost a frame because of bad wiring or poor storage. Maybe a building's wiring did create a static that sounded like a knock and made an elevator's lights hiccup. Those are all possible. They do not, however, explain the smell that follows someone like a traveling companion. The white cloud's clean edges, a woman who smiled crookedly by an ATM, a pale passenger in a back seat whose smile felt practiced. There is the rule each of these people made. Stay in when the clock says the night is owning the streets. None of them made their rule because they were superstitious. They made it because they had seen, or heard, or felt the point at which the ordinary bends and stops being comfortable. Rules are the easiest things to change. Habits take longer, but each story ended with a habit that changed, a small, steady adaptation in the life of someone who had been surprised by the night. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, that's fine, I'll be brave, I'll step out for a minute, remember something the people who told me all shared. It only takes one small choice. It only takes one moment where you decide the minute won't hurt. The night pays attention to those decisions. It remembers them, catalogs them. And sometimes, the people in these stories swear, without zeal, without drama, that whatever brushed past them had a patient intelligence. It approached politely, or it waited, or it watched, and then it left a mark by teaching a rule. I don't know whether the marks the night leaves are paranormal, psychological, or physical. In some way we haven't inventoried yet. I don't have proof. I only have testimonies. People who are awake now because they refused a late-night impulse, and people whose lives are rearranged by a single wrong smile or a static hum. I've told you 8 of them. Each is precise, different in the details, but the pattern is the same. Ordinary decision, small anomaly, immediate panic, escape, and then a rule that sticks. You might sleep anyway. You might step out for a cigarette, for cash, for one more party, for a machine that needs fixing, for a bike ride you think you can handle. If you do, I can't promise anything. I can only tell you what these 8 people said. That the night remembers. So here's my last thing, and it's simple. Keep a light on, keep a friend's number on speed dial. Do the small, sensible things you can control. When the world outside feels like a different language, don't add to the risk by being a translator for the dark. If you like these stories, and you want more of the night's small advertisements and the rules people make afterward, subscribe, and we'll meet here again with more accounts. But before you close your eyes tonight, consider this. You think it's safe to get up for one thing just for a minute? Don't sleep yet. The night will listen, and sometimes the night will answer.